The courtroom was the largest Sarah Vance had ever seen. It stretched upward like a cathedral, with seats carved into the walls in rising circles. Hundreds of alien delegates filled those seats, their bodies shaped in ways that still surprised her, even after 3 years in galactic space. Some had too many limbs. Others had no limbs at all. A few existed as floating clouds of gas contained in magnetic fields. All of them were looking at her. Sarah sat alone at a small table in the center of the floor. Her court-appointed defender, a Philian named Taurus, sat beside her. He was a thin creature with pale blue skin and large dark eyes that never seemed to blink. His hands shook slightly as he arranged his documents. He had told her before the trial began that he had never represented a human before. He had also told her, with what she suspected was honesty, that he did not understand the charges against her. Neither did she entirely, but she understood enough to know that this trial was not really about justice. It was about fear. The Velith prosecutor rose from his table across the floor. His name was Counselor Vrath, and he was impressive in the way that powerful beings often were. He stood nearly 3 meters tall, with 4 arms and scales that caught the light like shattered glass. His voice carried easily through the chamber, without any need for amplification. "Honored delegates of the Galactic Tribunal," Vrath began, "we gather today to address a matter of grave concern. The accused, a human female designated Sarah Vance, stands charged with the deployment of banned weapons during an incident aboard Waystation 11. 3 citizens of the Corvin Dominion were grievously injured in this attack. The evidence will show that this human used weapons so primitive, so barbaric, that our sensors could not even identify them." Murmuring rippled through the chamber. Sarah kept her face calm. She had learned that aliens often misread human expressions, seeing aggression in smiles and submission in direct eye contact. Better to show nothing at all. Vrath continued, his crystalline scales flashing as he gestured with all 4 arms. "The Corvin victims remain hospitalized. Their injuries are severe. Shattered exoskeletons, crushed joint structures. One suffered a cracked skull plate that required emergency surgery. The medical reports describe the damage as consistent with industrial equipment, heavy machinery. Yet our investigation found no such equipment at the scene." He paused, letting the words settle over the assembly. "Weapon scans of the corridor showed no energy signatures, no projectile residue, no chemical agents, no biological toxins. Nothing." Vrath turned to face Sarah directly. "And yet 3 Corvin warriors, each trained in combat, each wearing light armor, were defeated in seconds by this single human. A species we have long considered among the weakest in known space." Sarah heard the whispers spreading through the chamber. She caught fragments of different languages, different translation frequencies bleeding together. Primitive, dangerous, deceptive. The words did not surprise her. Humans had only joined galactic civilization 12 years ago, and they had spent most of that time being dismissed as irrelevant. A young species from an unremarkable world, lacking the natural weapons that most spacefaring races possessed. No claws, no venom, no armored hide, no psychic abilities, just soft skin and blunt teeth and a tendency to smile too much. The aliens had never bothered to look deeper. Taurus leaned toward her, his voice a nervous whisper. "This is very bad. The Corvins have significant influence in this sector. They are demanding severe punishment." "What punishment?" Sarah asked quietly. "They have requested execution. The tribunal is unlikely to grant it, but they may approve indefinite detention or forced exile to a penal world." He paused. "I am sorry, I do not know how to defend you against charges I do not understand. What weapon did you use?" Sarah looked down at her hands, resting flat on the table before her. They were small hands, scarred in places from years of training. The knuckles were slightly enlarged, the skin over them thickened. To her, these marks told a story. To the aliens watching her, her hands probably looked soft and harmless. "I did not use a weapon," she said. Taurus made a sound that her translator rendered as frustrated confusion. "The evidence clearly shows—" "I know what the evidence shows. I was there." Sarah met his dark eyes steadily. "I stopped 3 men who were trying to kidnap a child. I used my hands. Nothing else." Before Taurus could respond, Vrath called his first witness. A medical officer from Way Station 11 approached the testimony platform, a Mindari with multiple sensory stalks and delicate manipulator arms. The Mindari were known throughout the galaxy as scientists and healers, respected for their objectivity. Sarah watched the creature settle into the witness cradle and wondered if that objectivity would help her or doom her. Please describe the injuries sustained by the Corvin victims, Vrath instructed. The Mindari consulted a holographic display that appeared before it. The first victim, designated Corvin Alpha, suffered compound fractures to the primary right limb. The joint was struck at a precise angle that caused the internal structure to fail catastrophically. The injury pattern suggests a focused impact of tremendous force applied to the weakest point of the joint architecture. Images appeared in the air above the testimony platform. Sarah saw the X-ray equivalent of a Corvin arm. The bone-like internal supports shattered like broken glass. The chamber filled with sounds of distress and anger. The second victim, the Mindari continued, sustained crushing damage to the throat structure. Corvin physiology protects this area with cartilage plating, but the impact penetrated this protection and caused significant trauma to the breathing passages. The victim required emergency intervention to survive. More images, more angry sounds from the Corvin delegation, seated in the upper tiers. The third victim suffered blunt force trauma to the skull plate and multiple fractures to the spinal support structure. The injury pattern suggests the victim was lifted and thrown with considerable force against a solid surface. The Mindari paused, its sensory stalks waving in what Sarah had learned to recognize as uncertainty. I must note that the force required to cause these injuries is significantly beyond what our records indicate a human should be capable of producing. Vrath stepped forward, his voice carrying a note of triumph. And what do your records indicate about human physical capabilities? Humans are classified as a low-threat species in the Galactic Registry. They lack natural weapons and their physical strength is rated as below average for carbon-based bipeds. Their bones are relatively fragile. Their skin provides minimal protection. They possess no venom, no claws, no natural armor. The Mindari's stalks waved again. According to standard biomechanical models, a human striking a Corvin with bare hands should injure themselves, not the Corvin. Yet the accused shows no injuries, Vrath observed. Correct. Minor bruising to the hands. Already healed. Nothing more. The prosecutor turned to face the tribunal, spreading all four arms wide. Honored delegates, the conclusion is clear. This human must have employed some form of weapon that our sensors cannot detect. Perhaps a technology we have not yet encountered. Perhaps something the humans have hidden from us since first contact. Whatever the case, these weapons must be identified, classified, and banned before more innocent citizens are harmed. Sarah felt the weight of hundreds of alien gazes pressing down on her. She understood what was happening. The Corvins were a powerful species, and they were embarrassed. 3 of their warriors had been defeated by a single human female half their size. That humiliation demanded explanation. It was easier to believe that humans possess secret weapons than to accept that the Corvins might simply have lost. Taurus stood, his voice wavering slightly. The defense would like to question the witness. Vrath gestured permission with obvious contempt. Taurus approached the testimony platform slowly. You stated that human physical capabilities are rated as below average. May I ask what this rating is based on? The Mindari consulted its display again. Initial surveys conducted during first contact, standard species assessment protocols, measurements of baseline strength, speed, and durability. Were these surveys comprehensive? They followed standard protocols. But were they comprehensive? Taurus pressed, showing more courage than Sarah had expected. Did they test for all possible physical capabilities? The Mindari hesitated. They tested for standard parameters, baseline measurements. What about trained capabilities? What about skills developed through practice? Vrath rose from his seat. Objection. The defense is speculating without evidence. The tribunal's presiding arbiter, an ancient creature of unknown species who floated in a gravity suspension field, spoke in a voice like grinding stone. The objection is sustained. The defense will present evidence before making such suggestions. Taurus returned to his seat, deflated. He looked at Sarah with something like despair. I do not know how to help you. I do not understand what you did. Sarah watched the Corvin delegation celebrating what they clearly believed was their coming victory. She watched the other aliens in the chamber looking at her with fear and suspicion. She watched the prosecutor preparing his next attack, and she folded her small, scarred hands on the table before her and waited. The truth would come out eventually. The question was whether these aliens were ready to hear it. Humans had been underestimated before. It was something of a species tradition. Throughout their history, they had faced larger predators, harsher environments, and enemies who assumed that soft skin and flat teeth meant weakness. Those enemies had learned otherwise. Sarah suspected the Galactic Tribunal was about to learn the same lesson. The second day of the trial began with the evidence that everyone had been waiting for. Counselor Vrath stood before the tribunal with visible satisfaction, his crystalline scales catching the light as he announced that the prosecution would now present security footage from the incident. "Honored delegates," he said, "what you are about to see is disturbing. I ask that you watch carefully because this footage contains the proof that humans possess weapons we have not yet identified." A holographic display activated in the center of the chamber, large enough for everyone to see. Sarah recognized the corridor immediately. It was a maintenance passage in the refugee quarter of Waystation 11, a place where the station's neglected and forgotten populations tried to survive. She had walked those corridors many times over the past months. She knew every corner, every blind spot, every place where bad things happened away from the eyes of station security. The footage began with an empty corridor. Then three figures entered the frame. They were Corvins, massive beings with hard exoskeletons that covered their bodies like natural armor. Their homeworld had gravity nearly twice the galactic standard, and evolution had built them to survive it. They stood over 2 meters tall, each weighing at least 200 kilograms. Their arms ended in hands with thick fingers, capable of crushing metal. They were dragging a child. The child was Cillian, a species known for their delicate builds and gentle nature. Cillians were refugees on the station, their homeworld having been destroyed in a corporate war decades ago. This particular child could not have been more than 8 years old by human standards. Her large silver eyes were wide with terror, and her thin arms struggled uselessly against the grip of the Corvin holding her. Sarah heard sounds of discomfort from some of the delegates. Others watched in silence. The Corvin delegation sat stone-faced, showing no reaction. Then Sarah appeared in the footage. She walked into the corridor from a side passage, her steps calm and unhurried. Even in the holographic display, the size difference was obvious. The Corvins towered over her. Their combined mass was probably 6 times her own. She looked like a child standing before giants. The audio activated, and her voice filled the chamber. "Let her go." One of the Corvins laughed. The translator rendered it as a harsh barking sound. "Walk away, human. This is not your concern. She is a child. You are taking her against her will. That makes it my concern. She is property now, bought and paid for." The Corvin holding the child shook her roughly, making her cry out in pain. "The Cillians cannot protect their young. Someone must find use for them." Sarah did not move. Her voice remained calm. "I am asking you politely to release her. This is the only time I will ask politely." The chamber was silent now. Every delegate leaned forward, watching the tiny human woman face 3 armored predators. Vrath paused the footage. "Note the threat implicit in the human's words," he said. "She clearly believes she possesses some capability that makes her dangerous to 3 Corvin warriors. No rational being would make such a threat otherwise." He resumed the footage. The largest Corvin stepped toward Sarah, his heavy footsteps echoing in the corridor. "You dare threaten us? You are nothing. Your species is nothing. Soft, weak, pathetic." He reached for her with one massive hand. "Perhaps we will take you as well. The buyers pay extra for exotics." What happened next occurred so quickly that gasps erupted throughout the chamber. Sarah moved. Her body shifted with sudden explosive speed, and she was no longer where the Corvin's hand was reaching. She was beside him, inside the reach of his arms. Her hand shot upward in a motion that seemed almost casual, striking the joint where his primary arm connected to his shoulder. There was a sound like cracking stone. The Corvin screamed. Vrath paused the footage again. Honored delegates, I will now replay this sequence at 1/10 normal speed so that you may observe the attack clearly. The footage resumed in slow motion. Sarah watched herself on the display, seeing the movements she had practiced 10,000 times. The strike to the arm joint was a technique called a knife hand, using the edge of her palm against the weakest point of the Corvin's anatomy. She had studied Corvin physiology for months, learning where their armor was thin, where their joints were vulnerable, where pain receptors clustered beneath the exoskeleton. The slow-motion footage showed the impact in detail. Her hand struck the joint at precisely the correct angle. The force traveled through the connection point and shattered the internal structure. The Corvin's arm went limp, hanging uselessly at his side. The footage continued in slow motion. The second Corvin released the child and charged at Sarah, his hands reaching to grab her. She stepped to the side, grabbed his outstretched arm, and used his own momentum to pull him forward. As he stumbled past her, she drove her elbow into his throat, finding the gap in his natural armor where the breathing passages were protected only by cartilage. He collapsed, clutching his neck, struggling to breathe. 2 seconds had passed. The third Corvin hesitated. In the slow-motion footage, Sarah could see the moment he recognized what was happening. Fear appeared in his eyes. He started to turn away, to run. Sarah did not let him. She closed the distance between them in a single step, grabbed him by the shoulders, and used his own backward momentum to lift and throw him. He flew through the air and slammed into the corridor wall with tremendous force. The impact cracked his skull plate and fractured his spine. He slid to the floor and did not move. 4 seconds from start to finish. The footage ended with Sarah standing in the corridor, breathing steadily, surrounded by 3 broken Corvins. The Cillian child crouched against the wall, staring at her with huge silver eyes. Vrath let the silence stretch before he spoke again. The prosecution asked the tribunal to note several important facts. First, the human displayed speed and strength far beyond what our records indicate her species should possess. Second, she targeted vulnerable points with precision that suggests advanced combat training or technological enhancement. Third, and most importantly, the damage she inflicted is consistent with industrial weapons, not biological capability. He turned to face Sarah directly. The only logical explanation is that this human possesses weapons that our sensors cannot detect. Hidden weapons, secret weapons, weapons that she used to assault 3 citizens of the Corvin Dominion. Taurus stood, his voice stronger than it had been the day before. The defense wishes to question this interpretation. You may do so, the presiding arbiter intoned. Taurus walked to the center of the floor, positioning himself between Sarah and the holographic display. The prosecution claims that my client must have used hidden weapons because her species is incapable of such physical feats. But has the prosecution considered that their information about humans might simply be wrong? Vrath made a sound of contempt. Human capabilities are documented in the Galactic Species Registry. The data is clear. The data is 12 years old, Taurus countered. It was gathered during initial first contact surveys. Standard protocols for assessing a new species. He paused. Standard protocols that test for natural weapons. Claws, venom, armor, psychic abilities. But what if humans possess a different kind of capability? One that your protocols did not test for? Such as, Vrath demanded. Taurus turned to Sarah. Miss Vance, will you please explain to the tribunal what you did to the Corvin attackers? Sarah stood. She felt the weight of hundreds of gazes pressing down on her again, but she had grown accustomed to it. She stepped forward until she stood in the center of the chamber, small and alone but no longer afraid. I used my hands, she said simply. The chamber erupted in noise, delegates shouting, translators struggling to keep up. The Corvin delegation roaring in outrage, Vrath spreading all 4 arms in theatrical disbelief. Impossible, the prosecutor declared. The footage shows exactly what I said. Sarah held up her hands, turning them slowly so that everyone could see. They were small hands, human hands, with soft skin and blunt fingers. These are my weapons. The only weapons I have ever needed. Vrath stepped toward her, looming over her with his massive frame. You expect this tribunal to believe that you defeated 3 Corvin warriors with nothing but your bare hands? That soft flesh can break hardened exoskeleton? That is physically impossible. Sarah looked up at him without flinching. It is not impossible. It is simply something your species has never learned to do. She lowered her hands. Humans call it martial arts, the art of using the body itself as a weapon. We have been practicing it for thousands of years. The chamber fell silent. On my world, Sarah continued, we did not evolve with natural weapons. No claws, no armor, no venom. We were prey animals, hunted by predators far larger and stronger than ourselves. So we learned to fight differently. We learned to use our bodies with precision and efficiency. We learned where to strike, how to move, how to turn an enemy's strength against them. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of delegates who had dismissed her species as weak and irrelevant. My hands are weapons that cannot be confiscated. My training is armor that cannot be removed. Every human who has studied these arts carries the same capability. She paused. Your sensors did not detect any weapons because there were no weapons to detect. Only me. The silence stretched on. Finally, Vrath spoke, his voice quieter than before. This is impossible to accept without proof. Sarah nodded. Then let me demonstrate. The tribunal recessed for 2 hours while officials debated whether to allow the demonstration. Sarah waited in a holding room with Taurus, who paced back and forth with nervous energy that seemed unusual for his species. This is unprecedented, he said for perhaps the 10th time. A defendant offering to demonstrate combat capabilities before the tribunal. I do not know if this will help us or destroy us. Sarah sat calmly in her chair, her hands resting on her knees. It will help us. They need to see the truth with their own eyes. Words alone will not convince them. But what if you fail? What if you cannot replicate what you did in that corridor? I will not fail. There was no arrogance in her voice, only certainty. I have been training since I was 6 years old. 20 years of practice. This is not something that fails. Taurus stopped pacing and looked at her with his large dark eyes. I do not understand your species. Every analysis says you should be weak, fragile. Yet you speak of combat as though it is as natural as breathing. It is natural. Sarah met his gaze. Every human carries the potential for violence. We evolved from predators despite what your records say. We hunted creatures larger than ourselves. We survived ice ages and famines and wars that killed millions. Violence is in our blood. She paused. But so is choice. We choose when to fight and when to show mercy. That is what makes us different. Before Taurus could respond, the door opened and a tribunal guard informed them that the demonstration had been approved. They returned to the main chamber, where Sarah found that the floor had been cleared and a large piece of equipment had been placed in the center. She recognized it immediately. It was a force measurement apparatus, the kind used to test the striking power of various species. A series of graduated impact plates were arranged in ascending order of durability, from soft plastics to reinforced metals. Sensors embedded in each plate would measure the force of any strike and display the results on a holographic readout. Vrath stood beside the apparatus with obvious skepticism. The prosecution has agreed to this demonstration on the condition that the results be entered into evidence. If the accused fails to produce force measurements consistent with her claims, it will prove that she must have used concealed weapons during the incident. The presiding arbiter's grinding voice echoed through the chamber. The accused may proceed with the demonstration. Sarah walked to the center of the floor and stopped before the apparatus. She was aware of every eye in the chamber watching her. She was aware of the Corvin delegation leaning forward, eager to see her fail. She was aware of Taurus gripping the edge of his table with white-knuckled hands. She cleared her mind of all distractions and focused on her breathing. The first plate was soft plastic, designed to measure the baseline strength of weak species. Sarah did not waste time on it. She moved to the third plate, a dense polymer that most carbon-based species could not damage without tools. She settled into her stance, feet shoulder-width apart, weight balanced on the balls of her feet, hands raised before her, loose and relaxed. She took a slow breath, drawing air deep into her lungs. Then she struck. Her fist shot forward with explosive speed, her entire body rotating to add power to the blow. The impact was sharp and loud in the silent chamber. The plate shuddered. The sensors flashed. Numbers appeared on the holographic display. Murmuring erupted throughout the chamber. The force measurement is significantly above the recorded human baseline, a technical official announced, approximately 400% above predicted maximum. Vrath stepped forward. The apparatus must be malfunctioning. The apparatus was calibrated this morning, the official replied. It is functioning correctly. Sarah did not wait for the argument to continue. She moved to the next plate, a harder material designed to test species with natural armor. She shifted her stance, changing her approach. This time she did not use her fist. She turned her hand sideways and struck with the edge of her palm, the same technique she had used against the Corvin's arm joint. The impact was even louder. The plate cracked. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Impossible, Vrath breathed. Sarah turned to face the tribunal. What you are seeing is not impossible. It is simply training. Any human who dedicates themselves to martial arts can achieve similar results. She held up her hand, showing the reddened skin where she had struck the plate. It requires years of practice. We condition our bones to become denser. We train our muscles to recruit more fibers during movement. We learn to focus all of our body's energy into a single point of impact. She walked to the final plate, the hardest material in the series. It was reinforced metal, designed to test industrial equipment and heavy weapons. This is what your sensors cannot detect, she said. This is what your records do not account for. The human body, when trained properly, becomes a weapon that cannot be taken away. She took a long breath. Then she struck. The metal plate rang like a bell. A crack appeared across its surface, spreading from the point of impact. The sensors flashed numbers that made the technical official check his equipment twice. The chamber was utterly silent. A figure rose from the elevated seats. Sarah recognized the species immediately. It was a Mendari, one of the scientific experts who had testified earlier about the impossibility of human combat capability. The creature's sensory stalks waved frantically as it approached the demonstration floor. "May I examine the plates?" it asked, its voice trembling. The presiding arbiter granted permission. The Mendari approached the cracked metal plate and ran its delicate manipulator arms across the surface. It studied the fracture pattern, the depth of the indentation, the molecular structure of the break. Then it turned to Sarah and examined her hands with equal intensity. Noting the calluses, the slightly enlarged knuckles, the thickened skin over the striking surfaces. "This is remarkable," the Mendari said finally. "The bone density in your hands is significantly higher than our records indicate for your species. The muscle attachments show evidence of repeated stress adaptation. Your entire hand has been weaponized." "Not just my hands," Sarah said. "Elbows, knees, feet, forehead. Every part of the human body can be trained as a weapon. We call them natural weapons, but the truth is that they are cultivated through years of practice." The Mendari turned to face the tribunal, its stalk still waving with agitation. "I must revise my earlier testimony. The injuries sustained by the Corvin victims are consistent with the force measurements we have just observed. It is physically possible for this human to have caused that damage using only her trained body." Chaos erupted in the chamber. The Corvin delegation roared in protest, demanding that the demonstration be invalidated. Other delegates shouted questions about human capabilities. Species that had dismissed humanity as irrelevant now looked at Sarah with new eyes. Some showed fear. Others showed calculation. A few showed something that might have been respect. Vrath pushed through the noise, his voice rising above the chaos. "Even if this demonstration is accurate, it only proves that humans possess dangerous capabilities they have hidden from the galactic community. These abilities must be registered and regulated. Any species that can turn its own body into a weapon system is a threat to civilized society." "By that logic," Taurus countered, finally finding courage in the moment, "you would also need to regulate the Threll venomous spines, the Corvin crushing grip, the Mendari acid secretions. Every species possesses natural capabilities that can cause harm." "Those are natural weapons," Vrath argued. "They are documented in the species registry. What this human has demonstrated is different. It is trained capability, enhanced lethality developed through practice." "So your argument," Taurus said slowly, Is that natural weapons are acceptable, but trained weapons are not? That a species born with the ability to kill is less dangerous than a species that must learn it? Vrath hesitated. The presiding arbiter's voice cut through the noise. The tribunal will recess to consider the implications of this demonstration. The accused will remain in custody pending further proceedings. As guards approached to escort her back to the holding room, Sarah looked up at the chamber one final time. She saw fear in many eyes. She saw anger in others, but she also saw something shifting in the way these aliens looked at her. They had thought humans were harmless, weak, insignificant. Now they knew better, and they were only beginning to understand what that meant. The tribunal reconvened after 3 days of heated debate. During that time, Sarah had remained in the holding facility, permitted only brief visits from Taurus. He brought her news from the outside, and none of it was good. The demonstration has caused a diplomatic crisis, he told her during one visit. Species delegations are demanding emergency reviews of all threat assessments. The Galactic Species Registry is being questioned for the first time in centuries. Several worlds have already begun restricting human travel and immigration. Sarah absorbed this information without visible reaction. Fear was inevitable. They preferred believing we were harmless. There is more. Taurus lowered his voice, though the cell was supposedly secure. Some delegates are calling for humans to be classified as a weapons-capable species under the Controlled Armaments Treaty. If that passes, every human in galactic space would be required to register their capabilities. Training in martial arts could be criminalized. That would be difficult to enforce, where, Sarah observed. Every human has hands. You cannot confiscate hands. They are discussing it regardless. Taurus hesitated. There are also rumors about why the Corvins were really in that corridor. Questions are being asked about the child, about trafficking. Some delegates want answers. Sarah nodded slowly. This was what she had hoped for. The trial had drawn attention. Now the right eyes were looking at the right places. When the tribunal reconvened, the chamber was even more crowded than before. Delegates who had previously ignored the proceedings now filled every available seat. Holographic broadcasts carried the trial to billions of viewers across dozens of worlds. The case of the human girl in her hands had become the most watched event in recent galactic history. Counselor Vrath rose to address the tribunal, but his usual confidence seemed diminished. The demonstration had shaken him, and everyone could see it. Honored delegates, he began, the prosecution has revised its position in light of recent evidence. We no longer allege that the accused used concealed weapons during the incident. We accept that humans possess trained combat capabilities that our initial surveys did not identify. Murmuring rippled through the chamber. However, Vrath continued, his voice hardening, this revelation raises even more serious concerns. If humans can train their bodies to become weapons capable of defeating armored opponents, then human biology itself must be classified as a controlled armament. We call upon the tribunal to add human martial arts training to the Galactic Weapons Registry and to require all humans to declare their combat capabilities. He gestured toward Sarah. The accused may have acted without concealed weapons, but she acted with capabilities that the galactic community was never informed about. Humans joined civilized space claiming to be a peaceful species with no natural weapons. That claim is now proven false. They are warriors hiding in plain sight. The Corvin delegation pounded their seats in approval. Taurus stood to respond, but before he could speak, a new voice echoed through the chamber. The defense calls for testimony from the Galactic Weapons Registry. Everyone turned to see who had spoken. It was a human, the first human besides Sarah to appear in the chamber. He was an older man with gray hair and a calm demeanor, wearing the formal attire of a diplomatic representative. Sarah recognized him from briefings she had attended years ago. His name was Ambassador Chen, and he represented human interests in the galactic community. On what grounds does the human delegation request this testimony? The presiding arbiter asked. On the grounds that the prosecution's request to classify human biology as a controlled armament would require testimony from the registry about how such classifications are made. Chen walked to the center of the floor with measured steps. We believe this testimony will be illuminating. The arbiter considered for a moment, then granted the request. A registry official was summoned, a bureaucrat of unknown species who seemed uncomfortable with the attention. It floated to the testimony platform on multiple wings and waited nervously. Please explain how species capabilities are classified under the Controlled Armaments Treaty, Chen requested. The official's wings fluttered anxiously. Natural capabilities are exempt from classification. The treaty was designed to control artificial weapons, such as energy projectors, projectile systems, chemical agents, and similar technologies. Biological capabilities possessed by species as part of their evolution are not subject to registration. So the Threll venomous spines are not registered? Correct. They are natural. The Corvin crushing grip? Natural and unregistered. The Mendari acid secretions? Natural and unregistered. Chen nodded slowly. And human hands? Human bones and muscles and tendons? Are these not also natural? The registry official hesitated. They are biological structures, yes, natural to the human species. Then training those structures to be more effective in combat does not change their natural status, does it? Any more than a Threll training to deliver venom more accurately would change the natural status of their spines? The official's wings stopped moving entirely. The precedent is unclear. The treaty does not specifically address trained enhancement of natural capabilities. No, it does not. Chen turned to face the tribunal. Because no one imagined that a species would need to train their biology to be dangerous? Most species evolved with natural weapons already in place. Humans did not. We evolved intelligence instead. And with that intelligence, we learned to make weapons of ourselves. He walked to the center of the floor, commanding attention with his presence. If this tribunal classifies human martial arts training as a controlled armament, you will set a precedent that destroys the entire framework of the treaty. Because training is not limited to humans, the Corvin warriors who attacked that child were trained. They practiced using their crushing grip. They learned techniques to make themselves more effective in combat. By the logic of the prosecution's argument, Corvin combat training should also be registered. The Corvin delegation erupted in outrage. The same applies to every species in this chamber, Chen continued, raising his voice above the noise. The Velith train their young to use their superior reach in combat. The Threll practice venom delivery. The Mendari learn to control their acid secretions. Every species enhances their natural capabilities through training. To single out humans for doing the same would be discriminatory and hypocritical. Vrath stepped forward. The difference is that human training was hidden from us. They claim to be harmless. We claim to lack natural weapons, Chen corrected. And that claim was true. We have no claws, no venom, no armor. What we have is the capacity to learn, to adapt, to improve ourselves through practice. He paused. If that is a crime, then every school and training facility in galactic space should be shut down. The chamber fell silent. The presiding arbiter spoke slowly. The tribunal will consider these arguments. But first we have another matter to address. The ancient being turned its attention to the Corvin delegation. Questions have been raised about the circumstances of the original incident. Why were Corvin citizens in the refugee quarter? Why were they handling a Cillian child? The leader of the Corvin delegation rose, a massive figure even by Corvin standards. That matter is not relevant to these proceedings. On the contrary, Ambassador Chen said, it is central to these proceedings. The accused intervened to stop what she believed was a crime in progress. If no crime was occurring, her actions might be deemed excessive. But if a crime was occurring, he let the implication hang in the air. The arbiter turned to Sarah. You may address this matter. Sarah stood and walked to the center of the floor. She had been waiting for this moment for a long time. 3 months ago, I arrived at Way Station 11 as part of a humanitarian mission. She began. I was assigned to work with the refugee populations in the station's lower quarters. During my work, I discovered evidence of a trafficking operation. Children from vulnerable species were being abducted and sold to buyers in other systems. The chamber stirred with uncomfortable sounds. I reported this evidence to station security. They investigated but claimed they lacked jurisdiction to act against species with diplomatic immunity. The Corvins were involved, but they could not be touched. Sarah's voice remained steady. So I continued gathering evidence. I documented patterns. I identified perpetrators. And when I saw 3 Corvan citizens attempting to abduct a child in that corridor, I acted. She turned to face the Corvan delegation directly. I did not attack them because I enjoy violence. I did not seek to prove human superiority. I acted because a child was in danger and no one else was willing to help her. Her eyes were hard. The question this tribunal should be asking is not why I used my hands. The question is why those Corvins were trying to steal that child in the first place. The chamber exploded into chaos. The tribunal recessed for a full week while investigators examined Sarah's accusations. During that time, the case expanded beyond anything the original prosecutors had anticipated. Teams of investigators descended on Waystation 11. They examined the refugee quarters. They interviewed witnesses. They traced financial transactions and shipping manifests and communication records. What they found was worse than anyone had expected. The trafficking operation was not limited to Waystation 11. It spanned dozens of stations and planets, involving multiple species who had participated in the exploitation of vulnerable populations for decades. Cillian children were only one product in a vast criminal enterprise that dealt in beings from 100 different worlds. Species that could not protect themselves were being harvested like resources, and certain powerful species had known about it for years. When the tribunal reconvened, the chamber was filled with tension. The Corvan delegation had shrunk considerably, with several members having been arrested during the investigation. Counselor Vrath was present but subdued, his crystalline scales dim in the light. Ambassador Chen sat beside Taurus at the defense table, and Sarah noticed that human observers now filled an entire section of the gallery. The presiding arbiter spoke first. This tribunal has completed its investigation into matters arising from these proceedings. The evidence is conclusive. A trafficking operation of significant scale has been operating within galactic space for an extended period. Multiple species and individuals have been implicated, including members of the Corvan delegation and officials from several other worlds. The arbiter's voice grew heavier. The tribunal finds this deeply troubling. These crimes occurred under our watch. They were enabled by diplomatic immunity and by the willingness of comfortable species to ignore suffering that did not affect them directly. A long pause. The accused, Sarah Vance, brought this matter to our attention through her actions. Actions that are no longer the subject of criminal prosecution. A wave of relief passed through the chamber. The charges against Sarah Vance are dismissed. Her use of force in defense of a child was justified under galactic law. Her methods, while unusual, did not violate any applicable weapons regulations. Vrath rose from his seat, his voice lacking its former power. And the matter of classifying human combat capabilities? The arbiter turned to address the full chamber. The tribunal has considered the prosecution's request to add human martial arts training to the Galactic Weapons Registry. After extensive deliberation, the request is denied. Vrath began to protest, but the arbiter continued. The precedent such a classification would set is unacceptable. Every species trains its members to use their natural capabilities more effectively. To single out humans for this practice would require similar classifications for dozens of other species. The Controlled Armaments Treaty was designed to regulate artificial weapons, not biological potential. The arbiter paused, and when it spoke again, there was something almost philosophical in its tone. The human capacity for trained combat is remarkable. It is also, we must acknowledge, a reflection of a species that learned to survive without natural weapons. They turned their disadvantage into something else entirely. Whether this should concern us or inspire us is a question each species must answer for itself. The Corvan delegation leader, one of the few members not under arrest, stood. This ruling makes humans a threat to galactic peace. They carry weapons with them wherever they go. Weapons that cannot be detected or confiscated. Ambassador Chen rose to respond, but Sarah spoke first. May I address the tribunal? The arbiter granted permission. Sarah walked to the center of the floor one final time. She was aware of the holographic broadcast carrying her image across the galaxy. She was aware that billions of beings were watching, waiting to see what the dangerous human would say. You are right, she said simply. Humans are dangerous. The chamber stirred. Every one of us carries the potential for violence. Our hands can heal or harm. Our intelligence can build or destroy. We are capable of terrible things. She let the words settle. but we are also capable of choice. She turned slowly, meeting the eyes of delegates throughout the chamber. I could have killed those Corvins in that corridor. My training would have allowed it. 3 strikes to vital points, and they would have died before they hit the floor. But I chose not to. I chose to disable them and leave them alive, because I wanted them to face justice, not to simply be removed. She paused. That is what separates humans from the monsters you fear we might become. We have the capacity for violence, but we also have the capacity for mercy, for restraint, for the choice to protect instead of destroy. She looked directly at the Corvon delegation. Your warriors tried to steal a child. I stopped them. They are alive because I allowed them to live. The same hands that broke their bones are the same hands that held back from killing them. She raised those hands, small and scarred and dangerous. This is what humans are. We are the choice between violence and peace. And most of us, most of the time, choose peace. The chamber was silent. Do not fear us because we are dangerous, Sarah continued. Every species is dangerous in its own way. Fear us only if we give you reason to. And until that day, perhaps consider that a species capable of such violence, yet willing to show such restraint, might be worth having as allies rather than enemies. She lowered her hands. The child I saved is named Mira. She is 8 years old. She likes to draw pictures of stars and dreams of someday seeing her homeworld, even though it no longer exists. Sarah's voice softened. She is alive because I was willing to use my hands. That is all the justification I need. She returned to her seat. The presiding arbiter called for final statements, but there was little left to say. The case had grown beyond a simple assault trial into something that would reshape galactic politics for generations. The revelation of human combat capabilities would change how other species viewed humanity. The exposure of the trafficking operation would force reforms that should have happened centuries ago. When the tribunal officially concluded and Sarah was released, she walked through the chamber toward the exit. Delegates watched her pass, their reactions ranging from fear to admiration to careful calculation. She ignored them all. At the door, she found the Cillian elder waiting for her. The old woman was small and frail, her silver skin showing the marks of a hard life. She was Mira's grandmother, and she had traveled across 3 systems to attend the trial. Without speaking, the elder took Sarah's hands in her own delicate grasp. Her fingers were cool and light as they traced the calluses and scars on Sarah's palms. The hands that had saved her granddaughter, the weapons that could not be confiscated. Thank you, the elder said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah nodded. There were no other words needed. She walked out of the tribunal building into the light of an alien sun. Ambassador Chen fell into step beside her. You know this changes everything, he said quietly. The galaxy will never look at humans the same way again. Good. Sarah flexed her hands, feeling the familiar strength in her fingers. They underestimated us because we looked harmless. Now they know the truth. Some will fear us. Some always did. She looked up at the sky, at the stars that held 1,000 worlds. But now they also know that we choose when to fight and when to show mercy, that our hands can protect as well as harm, that our most dangerous weapon is not our bodies, but our judgment. Chen considered this. And if they decide we are too dangerous to tolerate? Sarah smiled, and there was something in that smile that made even the ambassador uncertain. Then they will learn what humans are really capable of when we have no choice but to fight. She walked on, leaving the tribunal behind her, leaving the fear and the politics and the endless debates behind her. Somewhere on Way Station 11, a little girl named Mira was drawing pictures of stars. Somewhere in galactic space, other children were still being stolen from their families. Somewhere there were still battles to fight, and Sarah Vance would be ready. Her hands were always with her,